Barnes. I'm the film critic for the ARTery, and with me is my friend Ed Siegel, the ARTery's critic at large. And today we're going to talk about the 1977 newspaper comedy Between the Lines. So we already have a question, so we're off to a great start here. Do you know if the paper is based off of any papers in Boston at the time? What do you think, Ed?
Yeah, absolutely. There are two papers that that come into play here. There were two papers in Boston since 1969 to the time they went out of business. They were the Boston After Dark was one, and the Cambridge Phoenix was the other, starting around 1969. The BAD goes back before that. And in 1972, Steve Mindich, who was then the owner of the what became the Phoenix, buys the Cambridge Phoenix and changes the name from Boston After Dark to the Phoenix. And he fires all the people who worked for the Phoenix, except for George Kimball, the sports writer. So they all get together and they form the real paper, which I have my mug to commemorate my 20th anniversary there. I mean, its 20th anniversary. And so there continue to be these two warring newspapers, eventually the Phoenix and the real paper. And those are the two papers that Fred Barron, the guy who wrote the movie, based it on. And I worked for both of them. I started in 1970. I had pitched the then editor, Teddy Gross, at Boston After Dark with the idea of having a TV column. And he bit. And so I started writing for them. And when Mindich bought the Phoenix, I switched to the real paper. I became one of the original shareholders of the real paper.
Right,
and
so it was a collective, right? There wasn't.
It was a collective, and I was as a columnist, as a critic, I was half-time. So I think I had half a vote in everything. But the interesting thing is that when I jumped from the Phoenix, from Boston After Dark to the real paper, the guy who replaced me as the TV critic writing Hot Dots and Tube Talk was Fred Barron, who is the screenwriter for the movie. And so Fred went on to fame and fortune, and I went on to whatever I went on to. Something less than that.
Now. So I think what's fascinating about the movie, it covers this lost culture of the alternative weekly. I know I sort of got in at the last gasp of it. I started writing for the Philadelphia Weekly at the end of the 90s. And it's, there were these scrappy underdog papers that were directly positioned in opposition to, say, the Globe or the Herald or the corporate media. And we were funded by porn ads in the back of the paper.
Right.
Our paper was like 400 pages and about 150 of it in the back with just smut and 1/900 lines. And,
right, and like the Globe and the Herald and everybody else, when those ads went online, that was the end of that business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. It's once porn shifted to the internet, it just wiped out. Our paper shrank suddenly.
That's right.
My 1,600-word columns became 800 words.
But, I have to say that I, at the same time that I was writing for these two papers, I had also started working at the Globe in 1971 as a gopher in the sports department. And it was kind of like having two parents, that there was one who let you stay up late and use 4-letter words, and get stoned, and there was
so that was the Globe, right?
You'd be surprised, but
oh, it was the 70s,
yeah. Because the Globe was every bit as much fun to me as the Phoenix and the Real Paper were. But they also, it was like having the adult who said, "No, you can stay up late, but you've got to do your homework first, and you've got to eat your vegetables, and listen to classical music as well as rock music." And so, to me, I was every bit as much enamored of my time at the Globe, maybe probably more so than I was at my time at the alternative papers. So they were in opposition to it, but they were also turning into it. I'll give you an example. That my first editor at Boston After Dark was John Koch. He was the arts editor, and he was very supportive to me of what I was doing and writing about TV. John becomes the arts editor at the Globe many years later. He's still one of my best friends, and he brought, when he started hiring people, when he started hiring critics, they were every bit as good as the critics who were working for the Phoenix and the Real Paper. So, I mean, the Globe in its own way absorbed a lot of the best of those papers, but it was not the same vibe. It was a separate but equal vibe.
Well, I remember the first time I picked up a Phoenix and I saw an F word and I was like, "It's in the newspaper!" Wow.
Yeah, when I left the Globe and I went back to and I started freelancing for both the Globe and the Phoenix and a lot of other people before I wound up at the ARTery at WBUR. And I said that my first piece for the Phoenix, once I started writing for them, it was going to be laced with 4-letter words, but but it wasn't.
Yeah, it's such a different mentality, even like 10 or 15 years ago, in terms of what you could get away with. Because I know like the paper where I work, that's how we tried to position ourselves in opposition to the other papers. So I would be encouraged to make dirtier jokes. And I know I've told you this story, but one time I wrote this horrible masturbation joke where like I had submitted it and I actually wrote an alternate line for my editor and said, "Here, use this instead. I just wanted to crack you up." And she showed it to the publisher, who read it and said, "That joke's going on the cover."
There you go.
So my mother had a subscription to the paper, and I had to make that call where I was like, "Well, good news and bad news. I'm on the cover this week. You're not going to want to leave it on the coffee table, though."
Well, I'll tell you that I had this. I compartmentalized both of them, and I thought that everything was fine, and it was. I mean, the people at the Globe didn't mind that I was writing this column for the Real Paper, and the Real Paper was interested in what I was doing at the Globe, etc. But there was one time I was really outraged because WBZ had preempted the final episode of Laugh-In for a documentary on Cardinal Medeiros.
I'd be curious too.
and so I wrote this furious piece about it, and the paper came up. There was a guy who came around the Globe and sold the Phoenix and the Real Paper on Sunday nights, and one of the guys on the sports copy desk where I was working picked it up and let out this roar, hysterical roar. He said, "Listen to what Eddie Siegel wrote." And he said, "WBZ preempted the last episode of Laugh-In for a documentary on the local witch doctor." That caused a little bit of a stir, right, at the Globe, but
it was before Twitter, so you could get away with it.
Yeah, probably not at the Globe, though. Probably. I used to say that I could write just about anything I wrote for the real paper for the Globe, but maybe not that line.
Yeah, the witch doctor line. No, it's not going to fly.
Right.
So I think, I mean, what happened to a lot of these papers, and what I think the movie captures great, is eventually they become they're victims of their own success. And in the movie, this media guy who owns a ton of papers, he sees they've got this countercultural cachet that he can turn and market. And I think the movie's very savvy about that shift. Sort of,
absolutely.
the end of the 70s, when when the hippie thing, it became a lifestyle brand.
Yeah. In fact, the guy who bought the Cambridge Phoenix from the original owner, he was the sleazy guy who he still owes me $50 for. He basically said, "You can press me for the $50, or you can continue to write for the paper." So yeah, I mean, no wonder I wanted to join the communal paper across the street.
Well, I think that's a part of like being a freelance writer is God bless the ARTery. It's the only place I haven't had to do this where half of your job is being a collection agent. You're like that kid, the paper boy and Better Off Dead, just banging on the door all the time, like $2.
That's right. Yep.
The hundreds of hours I've spent to get like $150 check from someone. But yeah, so it happens with these papers. I know it happened with the Philly Weekly, is then like these hedge fund guys or self-appointed media geniuses end up buying the place out. And I've noticed now the really troubling thing, they did this with the new owners of the Philly Weekly did this. The first thing they do is wipe out the archives.
Yeah, isn't that awful? I mean,
I would think it would be an asset that you could drive traffic to your site with all of these old articles. And they just flush all that work right down the toilet. I had a 15-year career just vanish overnight. Like
I know. It's tragic, really. And I think that the Phoenix tried to keep one going, but it's gone. And I wrote a lot of good things for Berkshire Weekly and Berkshire Magazine in between the Globe and the NWBUR, and that's all gone. So yeah, it really is sad, and it doesn't take that much to keep it going.
No, and I mean, I have all the stuff saved at home, but it's not where anyone can read it. And honestly, considering like the jokes I was telling you about before, maybe it's a good thing that they've wiped everything I wrote when I was 25 and half in the bag doesn't need to be on the internet. It's keeping me from getting. As soon as the virus is
over, I'm coming over and reading them all.
But I know at my old paper there are a lot of people doing a lot of good reporting about some bad actors in the business and finance parts of that city, and that's all wiped out now.
Yeah, but one thing that I think that I think that the movie, that Fred did a great job in capturing the vibe of the papers. But one thing I don't think that really does come across is how good the journalism was at the Phoenix and the Real Paper from beginning to end. I mean, even when the ownership wasn't supportive, that the people kept writing, good serious stuff. The Phoenix is, as the alumni will tell you, wrote the story of the sexual abuse scandal a year before the Globe did.
They didn't get the movie though.
They didn't get, as the writer herself acknowledged, she was a staff of one, and it really took us a team to really uncover all of that. But she was the first one who the Phoenix actually started down that road before the Globe did. And all credit to both of them. But I think that the movie, in the movie, everything is kind of light. Even the heaviest moments are still kind of light. And in real life, the sort of the lightest moments were really heavy.
Well, I think the movie too, it's not really it's not that concerned with journalism more. I think it's more of a generational portrait of these guys. They were all young radicals, and then they're all kind of turning 30, and they're burnt out. You know, the main character, John Hurd there, he used to write all these investigative things about abuses in nursing homes. And now he's just interviewing strippers so he can hang out in the combat zone. And, you know, the other guy's just staying home and working on his book.
Yeah. But it also really captures the boys' club nature of
Absolutely
what those two papers were like, where all the top editors were guys, and you know they certainly let women in. Janet Maslin was the film critic at Boston After Dark, and Laura Shapiro was writing great stuff for the real paper, but it was really a boys' club, and I thought that that's even, you can even see that in the careers of the actors, that as good as Jeff Goldblum is, and I love him, I mean, he is pretty much doing the same affect from Between the Lines to Martin McDonagh's play The Pillow Man, where he was great, but he's playing the same character, basically.
Okay. Was there as much sexism? This is a question from Beth. Was there as much sexism and toxic masculinity in your alt weekly workrooms as there was in this film? What about your current workplaces?
Not in BOR. But I would say, for one thing, I was not really a member of either the Phoenix or the Real Paper family to the extent that I was working there. Mm-hmm. I just wrote my column and brought it in once a week and was more an observer than a participant. So there was certainly you know, I'm not sure I would say toxic masculinity as much as what we were talking about in terms of it being a boys' club. I do know that the way that this is sort of goes with the movie, that the way that the Real Paper, a lot of people think that the Real Paper broke up, it lost its spirit when the assistant publisher, who he was a friend of mine, his wife left him for the publisher, and began a war between the three of them, and he, you know, including his going over and kidnapping the dog that they shared. And you know, that's kind of what I mean by the light moments being that the heavy moments were light in the movie, or when we're talking about it, but in real life, I mean, it was like a Shakespearean tragedy, and and I think that kind of carried over into the spirit of the Real Paper, that it was not a band of primarily brothers, but a band of brothers and sisters anymore. It was every person for him or herself.
You know, it's interesting talking about sexism, because this film was directed by a woman, Joan Micklin Silver, and the movie was out of circulation for a long time. It was produced independently and released independently. They used the same same people that John Cassavetes did to make his films, that were self-financed. Wow. And there's a guy named Jeff Lipsky who would basically go from town to town with the cans. They set up this whole distribution network. So it was very hard to find. But I've noticed, in general, you want to talk about a boys' club, the 70s filmmakers, it's been lionized. There's that book, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, and, you know, it's all this myth of this hard drugging alpha male, you know, multiple divorced boy genius that took over Hollywood. And only recently, in part with the recent restoration of Between the Lines and its release, and now we've been seeing films being restored by Joan Tewksbury, who made Old Boyfriends. Elaine May's films have all found this resurgent, and Barbara Loden's Wanda. So this Micklin Silver renaissance, she did another film right after this called Chilly Scenes of Winter, which also starred John Hurd. And
very good film too.
That was terrific, and that was out of circulation for a long time, and that's back. So I think it's good. There's sort of been this course correction,
right? But you know, the other thing I was going to say when I was talking about Jeff Goldblum and Bruno Kirby and to maybe a lesser extent John Hurd playing the same character over and over again, you find that with the women, they had to really become actors. that with those guys, they're hitting like C major in every movie they make. And you look at Lindsay Krause, and she's totally different from one movie to from this movie to House of Games to, I see her every summer now in at Gloucester Stage. And I won't be seeing her this summer, but they and Jill Eikenberry and Mary Lou Henner. I mean, they really had to. They couldn't play that same role over and over again because there wasn't the demand for them that there were for the guys, and so they really had to sharpen their craft to an extent that maybe the men didn't.
Well, I mean, this cast is ridiculous. This is the most stacked cast.
Right.
For someone like Micklin Silver, it's only her second movie. But The Secret Weapon, her casting director was Juliet Taylor, who was like the key New York casting director. She ended up doing all of Woody's movies, all of Mike Nichols' later films. And she gave this stage actress named Meryl Streep her big break in Julia. But I mean, if you look at all these people, so it's the first movie for John Hurd, who of course was this absolute New York legend, this wild man. And, reading up on Hurd for this, it's kind of sad because he admitted in an interview later in his career that he kind of gave up and became a hack actor.
Right.
Like he got really good at playing this sleazy, yuppie scumbag, and he's the bad guy in Big and the dad in Home Alone, and he sort of phoned it in. And he acknowledged because he'd had this big theater run, and he was a famous party animal. When they were first starting out, he was roommates with Rosanna Arquette.
Wow.
And she talked about waking up one morning to make coffee, and there was Cher in the kitchen making a cup of coffee wearing John's shirt.
Well, one other thing I wanted to say about Lindsay Krause is that I thought that she was like an amalgam. In fact, one thing that Fred did is that I don't think any of these people were really based on any particular people that I knew at either paper, but they were kind of delicious amalgams of them all, and including Lindsay Krause's photographer, because she just struck me as an amalgam of all the pretty women at the two papers who I was too shy to ask out.
Well, you really get a sense from the film of these poor women. In addition to their jobs, they have to handle these guys' egos all the time.
Right.
Like this Stephen Collins character is just unbearable.
Right. Yeah, talk about a guy who played the same role every time.
I know. Yeah. Well, he's not working anymore.
Right.
But yeah, it's funny you mentioned Bruno Kirby, because here you have this kid from the Classifieds, this cub reporter, and in the course of the film, he's the only one who breaks a story.
Right. Yeah, that probably didn't ring true to, but it was a great device in the movie.
And that was Bruno Kirby. I mean, he was Clemenza in Godfather 2. He was the young Clemenza.
Yeah.
And then then went on to Harry and Sally, and like he died far too young. But also a funny trivia: if you've ever seen the movie Cruising, he's the guy with the Crisco. And we'll just leave that there. If you haven't seen Cruising, is he a shudder of terrified recognition? All
right, I probably am not going to go back and investigate, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, it's kind of, it doesn't appear a lot on his official resumes, but that was him. Yeah, so Goldblum, I felt your question here. I felt such affection for these characters. Do any of them reflect your own alt weekly experiences? Young and hungry, big egos, camaraderie, dating coworkers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all the above. There were justifiably a lot of big egos of people who went on to have significant careers, and John Landau, who was the music and then the film critic for the Real Paper, he came up with the line, "I've seen the future of rock and roll, and it's Bruce Springsteen." And then he ends up becoming Bruce Springsteen's producer, and
based off a show at the Harvard Square Theater.
And you know, Paul Salmon, who was an editor at the Real Papers at I forget what they call it now, the PBS NewsHour, and my direct editor at the Phoenix was John Lipsky, who became a significant playwright in around Boston. And so, you know, there were plenty of big egos, but that's not any different than the Globe or any place else that I've worked, or including the dating coworkers, and I forget what some of the other things were. But yeah, it definitely rang that all of what that question asked definitely rang true in my own experience at the three papers, I'll say, including the Globe.
Well, and the Goldblum character really gets it of just being broke, trying to cash in on anything.
Right.
Like he's going to take his free records and sell them so he can buy weed.
Right.
What's his line? "I can't smoke records."
Yeah.
He's constantly trying to trade off, even up to the last scene. He's getting the guy to buy him a drink because he reads his column.
Right. Yeah. You know, I never knew anybody who seemed exactly like Jeff Goldblum, but I knew a ton of people who were all Jeff Goldblum in one regard or the other. And, you know, the same goes for John Hurd and the other actors and characters, that they just feel like my old friends, even though I didn't know anybody exactly like any one of them.
Well, the movie does have that great, it's sort of specific to the 70s too, that great hangout vibe where it's very like Robert Altman-esque. You just sort of, you know, you spend about a week with these people, and there's not really a motor of a plot. There's a guy coming in to buy a paper and you can figure out what's going to happen. You know, you're not waiting on the edge of your seat to see what's going to be revealed, but it is that low key. Those are some of my favorite movies. I'm a huge Altman fanatic.
Yeah.
So when you get these kind of relaxed ensembles, you know, and they're very rewatchable because you want to spend more time with your friends.
Mm-hmm. But you know, I keep coming back to this, that while at the Real Paper, it was like hanging out with everybody who was like you, and at the Globe, I was having an equally good time hanging out with people who were voting for Nixon. And so it was like learning to play a different sport.
Yeah.
At the Globe, and when I think back to the 70s, I probably had a better time with the folks at the Globe than I did at the Real Paper.
Well, half of the hippies ended up voting for Reagan anyways, right?
There you go.
That's what I think the film really catches, that shift of, it's funny too, because I always say within, you know, like 5 years, these characters would be the people from The Big Chill.
That's a great line.
And once again, Jeff Goldblum is a really antsy journalist, always trying to cop a feel on the drunk girls. From the film to film, that was just his thing for a while.
That's right. It's just playing the same character again.
This was the same year, too, that he was in Annie Hall and forgot his mantra. So,
I forgot that.
That was a big 1977 for Mr. Goldblum.
And
another funny casting note, the guy at the end he's hustling drinks from at the bar, that's Doug Kenny from the Harvard Lampoon, who wrote Animal House and Caddyshack.
Wow.
He's the long-haired dude who recognizes him and buys him the drinks. That's
great. I will tell you that the best piece that I never wrote was for Boston After Dark. I stayed up late one night and watched Samuel Fuller's Shock Corridor. I said, boy, you know, I could do that. I could check myself into an asylum and, and write an expose about it. And I actually went to, I think it was Paul Solomon and Teddy Gross were my editors. Arnie Reisman might have been in there too. And yeah, great idea. And, you know, came up with a plan, you know, because at the end, Peter Breck and Shaw Carter's, nobody knows and they can't let him out.
Right. Then it's raining in the hallway for some reason.
But so, you know, we had actually gotten as far as talking about how we were going to ensure that they could get me out anytime I wanted. It was getting to be too much. And
a terrible idea.
And Boston After Dark at the time paid $20 an article, no matter what. But I remember one of them said to me, you know, I think we could do this in 2 parts and actually pay you $40. And I think it was at that point that I said, you know, maybe I really don't want to make my name this way for $40.
I'm really glad that didn't work out.
I am too.
That's fantastic. Okay, so we have a question from Kate Gardner here. What sort of normative questions and suggested answers do you believe the film raises on the relationship between contemporary journalism and the pressures of capitalism? I'm afraid to say that. That battle was lost a long time ago. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, if you read about the real papers, case study in how a communal experiment like that just can't work in a capitalist society. That the pressures are just going to be too great to. If you're a success, then the pressures are going to be great to sell, and the pressures to, you know, toe the line and get advertising are there as well. I think, you know, when I said that everybody got paid the same, I think that the one exception was Mr. Landau, who got more money than anybody else because the feeling was that he could pull in record advertising, and which was true, and so even there's kind of the seed that, you know, we're a bunch of communalists, but, you know, there are going to be compromises that we have to make, and little by little, you know, the compromises become compromising. And I had left the real paper for kind of full-time work at the Globe, even though I wasn't on staff, long before they sold. But from a distance, it just became obvious that the pressures are there, and I think that journalists do a slightly better job than most places at keeping those pressures at bay, but it's never going to be fully successful. And you know, you just see it in what you were talking about with the porn ads that
the revenue streams have vanished.
Yeah, and you know, I never saw a case at any of the papers I worked for where something was censored because it was going to offend an advertiser. But there were plenty of tense moments where, you know, you kind of wondered, and you know, you even get that at a place like PBS where they're always fearful of running afoul of funders, and you know, we live in a capitalist society, and it's gonna rear its head at some point.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a question of self-censorship too. For you want to keep having access, so you're not gonna.
Exactly. I mean, I wouldn't use that witch doctor line at the
right. Your audience,
but it becomes more than that. You're right. I mean, it becomes a you don't even think about it. You just as you're writing, you just kind of know that you shouldn't cross certain lines. I'm
always surprised when these hedge funds guys like buy papers, and now it seems like every billionaire wants one. But like the margins are terrible.
Yeah.
So, the margins are terrible when things were good. So I can't imagine now, like, unless it's like an ego thing, like I alone can fix it, or if it's the Citizen Kane line, I think it would be fun to run a newspaper.
Well, on the other hand, I'm kind of still thankful that that for all the things that I don't like about Jeff Bezos, that he seemingly has done a good job running the Washington Post.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I subscribe to the Post, actually.
Yeah. And that I think that he and John Henry at the Globe have pretty much left the editorial staff alone, although cutbacks are cutbacks, and they've all gone through that, even at the Times. So you're right. I mean, the margins are terrible, and it's amazing that journalism is as good as it is. But that's kind of off the point of these two papers, where but maybe more to the point is that they, as I said, they're still doing significant journalism up until the point that they croaked.
It's also, though, the movie has a very, there's this great wistful sense to the film where everyone's talking about how great it was 10 years ago. And I know every newspaper, I've been every place you go, oh, you should have been there then, man.
Yeah, right.
The only place I've ever worked where they're not talking about how much better it used to be is the ARTery, because we're too new.
Right. And even at WBUR in general, I would say that that's true, that there's no great nostalgia for past days, that people were pretty happy in the present tense. And
I notice how sneaky the music is coded in the movie too, because there's not a lot of contemporary 1977 music. Instead, they all go see Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes, which is this 60s blue-eyed soul. They're doing Sam Cooke covers. It's this constant rearview mirror through the whole film.
Right, and good for Joan Micklin-Silver in doing that. I mean, instead of doing the big chill, what can I put on the soundtrack here?
What the disco. Also, I think just it makes it more enjoyable. Every movie should stop for 10 minutes in the middle and become a Southside Johnny concert movie.
Right.
It certainly lifts the spirits. Okay. Here we go. Question from Margie Aarons Barron and Jim Barron. As former Phoenix writers and brother and sister-in-law of Fred Barron, who wrote Between the Lines, how would you describe the relevance of the movie?
It captures a time. It captures a time and a sensibility really beautifully. Is it terribly relevant to what's going on today? I don't know that it is, but
I think it is very much.
All right, go ahead. You take it.
Well, when it was re-released last year, I know a friend of mine had just been part of he'd been at the Metro for a long time, and that had a similar situation as most of these newspapers. They get busted out by the finance bros. But I know, like the re-release in New York, it was just all laid off media professionals going to see it in the middle of the afternoon and just sobbing.
Right.
But I found it reassuring personally, because I'd always been told that these were the good old days, and it was like, oh, they were having the same fights 40 years ago. So these struggles are eternal. It wasn't just that I missed everything.
That's right, and that actually the real countercultural paper for me, the really formative countercultural paper to me, where there were far fewer of the compromises that we're talking about, was the BU News, which I worked at from before that, from 1967 to 1969. And, that to me was a much more relevant experience than my days at the Phoenix and Real paper. And, I really learned a lot of what I really became more of the writer that I am today, working with people like Ray Mungo and Joe Pilati and Howard Zinn, who was really kind of like a friend of the News, and who I would say was the de facto faculty advisor. But we got him to write for us a lot, and that to me was a kind of pure experience, even though a lot of the craziness that was in the movies was certainly there in those days too. But so I guess when I think about how good things used to be, the BU News really seemed more that place to me than the two alternative weeklies.
Was that also because it was your first, though, or?
It was the first, and it was also, that was my family, really. That was, we really were a band of, again, primarily brothers and a few sisters. But at that point I was writing about politics, and that was much more in tune with the times than writing about TV. Although, when I write about TV, I always tried to write about politics as well.
Well, it's all part of the same. That's we're running low on time, but when people say, leave politics out of the entertainment.
Oh, no.
All art is inherently political.
Yep, get it in there as often as you can.
So I'm getting the high sign here. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to close out with? Or?
I don't know. I think that the movie is almost like a precursor of the indie film movement, and when you watch it, its pleasures are just so not what a Hollywood movie is. And I didn't know that Marjorie Aarons Barron was related to Fred Barron, and I think that's great. I hope that Fred is doing well. He did a great job on this movie.
I'll comment.
Here's Fred now.
I would have been way more nervous if I knew he was watching.
Oh, me too. Me too.
Well, we can't top that. So I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Ed. Great to see you. Hopefully we can hit that margarita place near the station again. Not have to talk from our homes like this next time.
I know. Well, I'll lift my real paper. See you again.
All right. Cheers. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe out there.
Bye-bye.